Before we get started with part 3, the final video in this series, I just want to take a moment to say how much I appreciate every single one of you who has been here, watching, listening, and especially engaging with the most recent videos I've made about summer. It means more than I can put into words that there's a space where I can lay out the facts. Not rumors, not gossip, not speculation, but information that matters. If you've missed parts 1 and 2, the links are in the description and pinned in the comments so you can go back and catch up. Doing this, gathering timelines, digging through archives, piecing together what really happened, isn't easy work. But it feels like the least I can do for summer. Every child deserves someone to keep their name out of the rumor mill and in the light of truth. Being able to create these videos, to carve out a place where the focus stays on her and not on the circus around her, means everything to me. It's my way of standing up for her and of making sure she isn't forgotten. I don't want your money or donations or Cash Apps, PayPals, or Venmos. What would mean the world to me is something simple. A quick like, and if you haven't yet, a subscribe. That kind of support is what keeps this work visible, keeps Summer's story from being buried under the noise. Thank you all for everything that you do to help me, to help each other, and to help Summer. By late spring of 2022, nearly a year had passed since 5-year-old Summer Wells vanished from her home on Ben Hill Road. What began as one of the largest search operations in Tennessee history had evolved into a long, grueling investigation. In those first 13 days, thousands of acres were scoured. Helicopters circled overhead, K-9 teams swept through the hollows, and more than 800 tips poured in. Yet not a single trace of Summer was found. Over the months that followed, the investigation pressed on. Searches were scaled back, but never abandoned. The red Toyota Tacoma remained a focus. Tips climbed into the thousands, though most led nowhere. The Wells family gave interviews, some raising more questions than answers, and even appeared on national television. Community vigils kept Summer's name alive, while speculation online grew louder and harder to contain. By late 2021 and into 2022, the strain showed. Summer's 3 brothers were removed from the home by Child Protective Services. Don Wells faced a string of legal troubles culminating in a jail sentence for DUI by February 2022. And investigators themselves admitted the burden was heavy, that after thousands of hours of work, the case was no clearer than on that first June evening. Meanwhile, the Reward Fund, established during the first weeks of the search and once viewed as a beacon of hope, was approaching its expiration date. By June 15, 2022, if no one had come forward with qualifying information, the more than $70,000 raised would be redirected to a local child advocacy center. What was meant to motivate tips now risked becoming a source of frustration and controversy. And so the 1-year anniversary arrived under a cloud of unanswered questions. Summer was still missing. The family was under scrutiny. Online speculation was louder than ever, and the very fund created to help bring her home was days from slipping away. On this difficult anniversary, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office gathered to update the public. Leslie Earhart, spokesperson for the TBI, began by stressing that the investigation remained active and ongoing. She reminded the crowd that law enforcement could not reveal many specifics in order to protect the case, but she confirmed what everyone already knew. Summer had been reported missing at around 6:30 p.m. on June 15, 2021, and the search for her had never stopped.
When we held the first media briefing on June 16th, honestly, we expected to have good news to report by the time the next media briefing came around. Unfortunately, instead, day after day ended in frustration and disappointment. At that time, no one expected that we would still be searching for Summer 1 year later.
Earhart described the case as outside the norm. The trail was thin with so few clues that every possibility, a walk-off, an abduction, or foul play, was still on the table.
We've said from the beginning that this case is outside the norm. There are few clues as to what happened to Summer, despite investigators doing everything within their power to find answers. All possibilities are still being explored.
Over the past year, investigators had executed search warrants, analyzed digital evidence, combed through social media accounts, and conducted nearly 170 interviews. The TBI alone had committed over 100 agents, analysts, and staff. Alongside the FBI and Hawkins County deputies, they carried out 3 massive ground searches involving more than 100 agencies, as well as countless targeted searches whenever leads surfaced. But the flood of false information online made their work even harder.
While investigators have been diligently working to find answers, they've had to deal with thousands of tips generated by false information that in some cases has been intentionally spread across social media platforms. We know that this case has attracted the attention of individuals across the country who genuinely care about summer and want nothing more but to help us find answers. We appreciate those people. However, we are also aware that there are some people using this case for their own personal gain by spreading false information on social media posts as facts. Some go as far as to solicit donations. This has had a major impact on the investigation and not in a good way.
Earhart urged the public to stop sending in tips inspired by YouTube videos or Facebook theories, and to only call if they had direct specific information about Summer's disappearance. Then Sheriff Ronnie Lawson stepped forward. He described the toll the case had taken on his officers, on the community, and on himself. He explained that no investigation in the history of Hawkins County had consumed more time, manpower, or resources. He praised the support of volunteers, rescue squads, and citizens who had provided food and encouragement during long search days. And he explained why private citizens were never allowed into official searches. The terrain was dangerous, and law enforcement needed strict accountability for safety.
And it's been the goal of this team since day one to find Summer. We've never stopped, we've never slowed down, we deal with it every day. And that's the whole purpose of this, to let you all know, despite what you hear, what you see, we haven't stopped. The men and women of these agencies have worked tireless, hours and hours and hours, and I commend every one of them for the job they've done, and we're going to continue till we find Summer.
When reporters asked about the Wells family's cooperation, the question carried extra weight, because at that time, Don Wells was in jail on unrelated charges. But investigators refused to characterize his cooperation, saying it would only add to speculation.
We're not going to characterize cooperation at this time. Honestly, doing so does nothing but create more speculation, and it doesn't benefit the investigation, but thank you for asking.
Other questions followed, about the privately organized reward fund, about the Wells children, and about the red Toyota Tacoma spotted near the property. Investigators admitted the truck remained unresolved. They couldn't confirm the timeline or location, but they wanted to identify the driver in order to put the lead to rest. Then came the question of Summer's last known movements. In the earliest hours of the investigation, reports suggested she had been seen walking away from the home. That narrative shifted, and reporters pressed investigators for clarity.
When this first came out, you guys said that Summer was last seen walking away from her home. That was like one of the initial reports that night. And then things kind of changed the following day. Is there any evidence that she walked away from home, or any evidence leading toward an abduction, or do we have any evidence of anything that night otherwise?
We don't have anything specific, and I think what's important to note there is that the sheriff mentioned that how many hours we've put into this investigation and how much time has been spent exploring every possibility: walk-off, abduction, other foul means. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind is it's still really wide open as to the what. We try to stay away from developing theories and just follow facts.
Officials acknowledged the challenges of searching the rugged terrain, especially during summer months when heavy foliage limited visibility. They emphasized again that there was no evidence of abduction and no single theory carried more weight than another. As the press conference came to a close, Earhart ended with a reminder.
I just want to point out one more thing. This case is not cold. We get asked that a lot. It's not. We're talking to the sheriff constantly. We all work together as one team, and we're determined to find answers.
1 year after Summer Wells disappeared, investigators insisted the case was not cold. They promised they had never stopped searching and would not stop until answers came. But beneath the official statements, tension was growing. The family's cooperation was in question. Dawn Wells remained in jail, and the reward fund that once symbolized hope was days from collapsing into controversy. The first year had ended with no resolution, only heavier questions, and as the summer of 2022 unfolded, those questions would only multiply. Less than 2 weeks after the anniversary press conference, attention shifted from the search itself to the reward fund, once seen as a beacon of hope, now a source of mounting confusion. The fund had been established in late June 2021, just days after Summer disappeared. It was set up under the administration of the Church Hill Rescue Squad and deposited at Civis Bank, an arrangement intended to keep the money local and accountable. 2 large checks, one for $25,000 and another for $10,000, formed the foundation. Dozens of smaller contributions followed, from mailed-in donations to deposits made directly at the bank. By December 2021, the balance had climbed to $73,705.90, a total that remained unchanged into the new year. From the beginning, the terms were designed to keep the effort temporary. If no one came forward with information that could bring Summer home within 6 months, the money would instead be donated to the Child Advocacy Center of the 3rd Judicial District. But in October 2021, with the deadline approaching and no qualifying tipster, the rescue squad extended the expiration to June 15, 2022, the 1-year anniversary of Summer's disappearance. Alongside the extension came repeated clarifications. Law enforcement had no involvement in the fund. The rescue squad itself would never receive or benefit from the money. Their role was strictly custodial, to hold the donations safely until either a tipster qualified or the money was released to the Child Advocacy Center. On paper, it seemed clear. The reward fund was supposed to represent community generosity, a way to keep hope alive and encourage credible leads. But as the 1-year mark drew closer, cracks began to show. Confusion about how the donations had been collected, uncertainty over which totals were accurate, and rumors about fundraising practices all combined to erode public trust. By June 2022, the very account created to inspire tips had become entangled in questions the rescue squad could no longer answer. What started as a straightforward promise was on the verge of collapsing into legal dispute. The shift came quickly. On June 23, 2022, just days after the 1-year anniversary, Captain Tim Coop of the Church Hill Rescue Squad released a public statement about the reward fund. Coop confirmed the fund remained active and under review, but he also made clear the situation was no longer simple. What had once been presented as a straightforward pool of donations had grown complicated by questions of oversight, accounting, and responsibility.
Some questions raised in regards to distributing the reward fund. We have been advised to and will be paying the reward fund money to the court and ask them to determine the proper resolution of the matter. Upon advice of counsel, that is all I can say at this time.
What court is that?
This is a statement that I'm making. At this time, it will be turned over to the court and ask them to determine the proper resolution of the matter.
What's the amount of the money?
At this point, at this point, I don't have the most accurate, up-to-date account. The money is still in the account this time, and that's all I have. Thank you.
But I'm just confused here, Tim. What court are we talking about? Is there a legal matter here?
At this point, that's all I can say.
Coop's words marked a turning point. For the first time, the rescue squad openly signaled that they could not continue to manage the fund alone. On the advice of counsel, they announced plans to place the money in the hands of the court, a step meant to ensure accountability, protect the squad from liability, and settle growing disputes over the donations. Within days, those plans became formal action. On June 30, 2022, The rescue squad filed a petition in Hawkins County Chancery Court asking that the account be frozen and surrendered for judicial review. Within a week of Coop's statement, the matter was in court. On July 5, 2022, the Churchill Rescue Squad formally petitioned Hawkins County Chancery Court to freeze further donations and surrender the account for judicial review. The filing revealed new details that had never been shared publicly. As of that date, the balance held at the bank was $40,305.47, far less than the $73,705.90 widely reported. The gap raised questions, and the filing explained why. Two major checks, one for $25,000 and another for $10,000, had been returned to their donors instead of being deposited. Meanwhile, the largest single sum still in the account was a wire transfer of more than $32,000, tied to online fundraising whose donors could not be fully verified. That questionable transfer, combined with the swirl of accusations and disputes surrounding it, made the fund too unstable for the rescue squad to manage responsibly. In their petition, the rescue squad asked the court to act as an interpleader, essentially taking custody of the money, sorting out which donations were legitimate, and releasing the squad from liability once the funds were transferred. They also requested a 4-week period of public notice in a Rogersville newspaper so that any donors could step forward with claims. The message was clear. What began as a straightforward effort to encourage tips had become entangled in rumor, confusion, and legal uncertainty. By midsummer 2022, the fate of the Summer Wells Reward Fund no longer rested with rescuers or the public, but with the court. The court battle stretched on through the rest of 2022. Month after month, the money sat in limbo while filings and notices played out. In early 2023, the Chancery Court issued its ruling. With no qualifying tipster to claim the reward, the entire fund would be transferred to the Child Advocacy Center of the 3rd Judicial District, the very destination named in the original terms. It was a subdued conclusion for something that had once carried so much expectation. The reward fund, created to inspire credible tips, had instead become mired in disputes and disappointment. And by the time it was resolved, it had done nothing to bring the investigation any closer to answers. On July 19, 2022, Don Wells released a midnight letter from jail, addressed to what he called Summer's kidnappers. In it, he pleaded for her safe return, warning of God's wrath on those responsible. Why don't you give our little girl back before God's wrath descends on you? You've broken many hearts and more, especially an innocent 5-year-old girl's heart. But woven into those appeals were long passages about the toll on his own life. Don wrote, "You see, the public blames us. I don't know if we'll ever find employment again. Nobody will hire my wife, and I've been fired from a job I've had for 13 years. We may end up losing everything." Even his closing words framed the loss in personal terms. "When you took our little girl, you took our very lives." It was not the first time Don had written from jail. A month earlier, on the 1-year anniversary of Summer's disappearance, he'd issued another letter describing how powerless he felt without her. In both statements, the emphasis circled back to his own suffering, the job he lost, the protests outside his workplace, the collapse of life as he knew it, with fewer words devoted directly to Summer herself. For some observers, these letters raised uncomfortable questions about where his focus truly lay. For others, they reflected a man crumbling under the weight of public suspicion and personal collapse. Either way, the letters became another layer in a case already clouded by scrutiny, shifting attention once again from Summer to the people around her. After Don Wells released his jailhouse letters in the summer of 2022, the case entered a quieter, more subdued phase. On October 30th, 2022, Don was released from jail. Just 2 weeks later, on November 15th, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issued a brief update on their website. It read in part, "The investigation remains active and ongoing." Unfortunately, we have no new updates to provide publicly. That statement set the tone for what would follow. Months with no new large-scale searches, no major press conferences, and only occasional reminders that the investigation was still active. The following winter brought another reminder of time passing without answers. February 4th, 2023 marked what would have been Summer's 7th birthday. That same month, a Hawkins County judge ordered that the unused reward fund be donated to the Children's Advocacy Center of the 3rd Judicial District, closing the book on the fund that had once been a centerpiece of community attention. As the 2-year anniversary approached in June 2023, the TBI released the first age progression image of Summer, an illustration created by forensic artists with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, showing what she might look like at 7 years old. The next day, on June 15th, local news stations marked the anniversary, but law enforcement had little new to offer. The Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the TBI all declined on-camera interviews, with investigators acknowledging only that tips had slowed and most were recycled theories from social media. Neighbors described how the case had unsettled their community, more traffic from outsiders, more no trespassing signs, while Don Wells gave a brief comment of his own. "I have hope. Whatever the outcome is, I have hope. Sooner or later, I will be with my daughter again." Another year passed. On February 4th, 2024, Summer would have turned 8. And on June 14th, just one day before the 3rd anniversary of Summer's disappearance, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released a video update. Assistant Director Josh Melton made it clear. Investigators still don't know if Summer was abducted or if she wandered away from her home and became lost. Both paths remain under investigation because focusing on only one, he explained, risks missing something crucial.
We don't have the evidence in this case to know for sure whether or not Summer was abducted or whether or not she walked away from her home and became lost.
Melton emphasized that despite the years that have passed, the case is not cold. A cold case, he said, is one with no new tips and no active investigative efforts. In Summer's case, more than 6,500 tips have been received, and agents continue to follow up on each one. He stressed that the work has never stopped, whether that's conducting ground searches, re-interviewing witnesses, or pursuing new angles of technology and vehicle sightings. Speculation, Melton warned, can be dangerous. If investigators themselves were to focus on theories rather than evidence, it would be a huge mistake. Instead, every option is being explored comprehensively.
Many people have speculated what they think has happened in this case. The difficult part of the speculation is that if we as investigators speculate and focus our efforts in one direction, we're making a huge mistake. We have to make sure that we're being completely comprehensive as we investigate. And being focused in one direction is a tragedy for an investigation.
At the heart of his update was something deeply personal. Melton said that when he sees Summer's picture, he sees his own daughter. And if his daughter were missing, he would want the exact agents working this case, some of the most talented and experienced in the TBI, along with federal and local partners. That, he said, is why the public can know this case is still active and still being pursued. By February 4th, 2025, Summer would have turned 9. And in the weeks leading up to the 4-year anniversary, the case surfaced again in a local interview. On May 13th, 2025, TBI spokesperson Leslie Earhart sat down with a reporter. Most of the conversation centered on the Bureau's broader work across the state, but when asked about long-term unsolved cases, she turned to Summer.
Along those same lines, when a case remains unsolved, like for instance the Summer Wells case, that's extremely hard because there's nothing that we want more than to solve a case, especially involving a child. And it's hard not having the answers, or being close to maybe discovering something and just knowing that we just need a little bit more information to resolve a certain situation. So there's nothing better than seeing a case solved and seeing justice served. But at the same time, it's also extremely hard for those cases where we haven't seen justice served yet.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned Summer Wells, so I did want to ask any updates on that case from your perspective or from the TBI standpoint, or?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It is still an open and active investigation. I think most people think that the case has gone cold, but that's not true. We still have agents working on it constantly. We follow up on any new information that comes in. I can say that we've been following up on information that we've received in the last few months. So it is very much an active investigation, and we will not give up.
Earhart's words echoed what the Bureau had stressed before. The Summer Wells case is not considered cold. Agents are still working it, and tips, even recent ones, continue to be checked. But by that point, nearly 4 years in, those reminders were all the public had to hold on to. On June 15, 2025, the community faced the painful reality of a 4th anniversary. And 2 months later, on August 13th, the TBI released another age progression photo created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children showing what Summer may look like at 9 years old. Alongside the image came the familiar reminder, the Amber Alert remains active, the investigation is ongoing, and anyone with information is urged to call the TBI. From Dawn's release in late 2022 through the latest age progression in 2025, the story of Summer Wells has been marked less by breakthroughs and more by silence, by anniversaries, birthdays, and carefully worded reminders from investigators. No new searches, no press conferences, no major revelations, just time passing and a case still without answers. On the evening of June 15, 2021, a call went out to Hawkins County Dispatch. 5-year-old Summer Wells was missing. Within hours, a massive search was underway. Hundreds of responders combed the woods and hollows. Helicopters circled above. The FBI joined the TBI and local deputies on the ground. For days, it felt like every inch of Ben Hill Road was alive with urgency, with the sheer will to find a little girl. But urgency can only sustain itself for so long. By the end of June, after thousands of hours and thousands of acres searched, no trace of Summer was found. The search shifted from frantic sweeps to slower, more deliberate investigation. And in that space, a new reality began to take hold. Without answers, the story of Summer Wells would stretch into months, and eventually into years. Over the next 12 months, the investigation carried on in bursts. New searches, new statements, new pleas. There was the reward fund swelling into the tens of thousands, meant to spark a tip that never came. There were national broadcasts like Dr. Phil that put Candace and Dawn in front of millions, not to shed light, but to deepen suspicion. And after those interviews, Candace was never seen publicly again. Her voice, once halting and uneasy, fell completely silent. There were targeted searches in the dead of winter when bare trees and frozen ground offered a chance to see what summer foliage had hidden. Each effort ended the same way. Nothing definitive, no resolution, no Summer. The Wells family, already under scrutiny, fractured further. The boys were removed from the home. Dawn's arrests and eventual jail sentence only sharpened public judgment. Even the investigators' relationship with the family, cooperative at first, gave way to silence and lawyers. And then, in June 2022, the case crossed its first grim threshold, a full year without answers. Dawn released a jailhouse letter written as much about his own losses as his missing daughter. It was one of the few times the family spoke publicly, and even then it raised as many questions as it sought to answer. After that, the gaps grew longer. Dawn's release from jail later that year. Quiet updates from the TBI, carefully worded and sparse. Anniversaries marked with little more than reminders. That Summer was still missing, that tips were still needed. A single age progression image in 2023, followed by another in 2025. Showing what Summer might look like now, a child who should be 9 years old, frozen in time since the day she disappeared. And through it all, the same refrain, no evidence of abduction. the very real possibility that she wandered away and got lost in the rugged terrain. In the end, however, all possibilities remain on the table. Perhaps the most telling part of this timeline isn't what happened, but what didn't. There have been no arrests, no charges, no confirmed sightings, no forensic breakthroughs, and after those early waves of activity, there have been no new large-scale searches. In place of answers, the years have filled with speculation. Theories have circled endlessly online, sometimes overshadowing the actual investigation. The Wells family has drawn both sympathy and suspicion, and the small community of Beech Creek has been forever changed by the attention. And yet, despite all of that noise, the truth is still what it was on June 15th, 2021. A little girl vanished from her home in broad daylight, and no one has been able to say exactly how or why or where she is. The search for Summer Wells has become more than an investigation. It's become a measure of time itself, days into weeks, weeks into months, months into years, each anniversary, each birthday, marking not just what has been lost, but what has not been found. As of today, more than 4 years later, Summer is still missing. Her case remains active, her Amber Alert still in place. Investigators insist they haven't given up, but the gaps between updates speak volumes. Maybe one day there will be an answer. Maybe one day this timeline will finally break open. But until then, the story of Summer Wells isn't just a mystery. It's a silence. A silence that began on a summer evening in 2021 and has only deepened with time. If you have any credible information about the disappearance of Summer Wells, please contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-TBI-FIND or the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office at 423-272-7121. Tips can also be submitted online at tbi.tn.gov. Investigators stress that even the smallest detail could matter. And for a little girl who has been missing for years, every lead is a chance to bring her closer to home.